Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the seminar Reflecting on the Future of European Quality Assurance, which has been jointly organized by 4 external quality assurance agencies, such as A3ES from Portugal, NOKUT from Norway, QQI from Ireland, and AQU Catalunya. We have also other participating entities in the seminar that we must also thank their excellent willingness to this event. In fact, they are the main actors of the adoption of the European standards and guidelines in the European higher education area, namely, first, the European Association for Quality Assurance in Higher Education, ENQA, the European Students' Union, ESU, the European Association of Institutions of Higher Education, EURASHE, the European University Association, EUAR, the European Quality Assurance Register for Higher Education, EQAR, and also an academic expert, a well-known academic expert from the University of Oslo. Thank you very much to all of you, as well as to attendees who showed interest in this event. The main objective of this seminar is to discuss about the different applications of the ESG, considering the broad, diverse, and flexible scope to be implemented. An analysis of the ENQA EQAR double decision-making process that we have until now on ESG compliance reveals some difference in interpretation of the ESG, and sometimes some inconsistency between decisions which may diminish the credibility of the whole process. However, different developments are taking place and different opportunities will appear. So this seminar, we have organized this seminar in 2 parts. In the first part of the seminar, the results of a detailed analysis of the decisions of ENQA and ENQA under ESG 2015 will be presented, detailing those cases where decisions were not concurrent or were not so consistent. This will be followed by a reaction from ENQA and EQAR. And after that, in a second part of the seminar, 2 discussion papers will be presented, including current development in quality assurance and exploring new opportunities for the external quality assurance agencies. Both presentations will be followed by comments from the main stakeholders. So let's start with the first part. And it is a pleasure for me to introduce Professor João Guerreiro, the A3ES president, and Maria João Rosa, well-known researchers at CIPES at the University of Aveiro in Portugal, who will present the paper Consistency of the Review across the EHEA results of an empirical data analysis prepared by A3ES. The presentation, I would like to take your attention to this presentation, and also the rest of the papers and presentations of the seminar are available on the website of the seminar in this document folder. And just before starting, I will let you know that the chat is open on YouTube and Facebook. So please send your comments and questions using this chat, and I will introduce it to the panel during the debate. So any question that you want to ask the speakers will be welcome. Please free to send us your comments and questions. So let's start now. And in this sense, I give the floor to the president of A3ES, Professor João Ferreiro, and Maria João Rosa. Please.
Thank you very much. I think you heard me. No, it's good. No, is the sound okay? I would like to welcome the participants of this seminar reflecting the future of European quality assurance, and to thank the director of Catalonia agencies, Martí, Casadesús, for the logistical support he has given to this seminar, as well as the directors of the other 2 agencies that co-organized this seminar from Norway and Ireland. I want to greet the director of EQAR, and the special greeting is due to the president of ENQA, Douglas Blackstock, recently elected, and who will surely continue the work of ENQA in order to guarantee the accreditation of quality assurance in higher education in our countries. The issues of this seminar are fundamental in the changing world in which the demands of the higher education systems are huge. In the changing world, I believe that we have to find flexible assessments and accreditation modalities that, within the framework of the European standards and guidelines, allow us to understand the new paths that higher education will have to follow. We can evoke some factors that contribute to the diverse environment that characterizes our situations. Programs in association with institutions from different countries, and namely the program from Erasmus+, European universities, short cycles training designed for different audience, young and adult, employed and unemployed people, degrees organized with other institutions, partners of higher education like companies, intermittent training footpaths with integration of professional activities which improve individual and collective skills, and so on. And we have other struggles, like the pressures of some professional corporations that block the creation of new areas of education that are required by the evolution of our societies. For these reasons, we think that the strategy of assessments and quality assurance must admit the flexibility to, within the framework of the European standards and guidelines, guarantee the quality of institutions, the requirements of the programs, and in general, the performance of the institutions. But I want to evoke the independence of our agencies, the public scrutiny of our activities, the strong mobilization of our stakeholders and all members of the academic community, and a clear public information to guarantee a strong social trust. Those characteristics are fundamentals. We must preserve both the diversity of institutions and the alignment with the quality standards that characterize Europe. For these reasons, the objective of this seminar seems to us to be very important. Our agencies in Portugal produced in the past some reflections that we think are important, like the speech of Maria João Rosa and Alberto Amaral that we will hear in a moment. Moreover, we are available to collaborate with the European partners in the necessary clarification of the various aspects that affect the quality assurance of higher education. Thank you very much for your attention, and we hope to benefit from this working day that will bring us new leads for the future work. Thank you very much. And now the word from Maria João Rosa.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Maria João Rosa. I'm a researcher at CIPES, also a professor at the University of Aveiro. And I'm going to present the results from an empirical data analysis that was prepared by A3ES. At the end of the former year. Basically, it was an analysis done by Alberto Amaral, and I also contributed to some extent to this analysis. I'm not sure if the slides are already on. They are? Oh, okay, they are coming. Okay, so basically what we did, we looked at into the decisions of ENQA and EQAR. If you can put the next slide, please. These are two very important actors in the quality assurance in European higher education, and basically they are responsible either for deciding on the membership of agencies, of quality assurance agencies in ENQA, and also EQAR is responsible for deciding on the registration of the agencies in EQAR. They do this, if you can put the next slide, based on the conclusions of the panel that reviews the activities of the agencies, and does that according to the ESG, European Standards and Guidelines, and for each standard, the panel concludes about the agency full compliance, substantial compliance, partial compliance, and non-compliance. What we found out, and of course all of you know about this, is that then both ENQA and EQAR also give their judgments on the level of compliance. And the issue here is that sometimes this judgment from EQAR and ENQA is not exactly the same. So they don't agree on the final judgment. ENQA gives one, EQAR gives another. Also, we would like to remember that there are, of course, activities that don't fall under the scope of the ESG. These include external quality assurance activities outside the scope or some consultancy activities. But overall, sometimes decisions on what can be classified as consultancy are not always clear. And this difference between the activities that fall under the scope of the ESG and that do not follow under the scope of the ESG are not so clear, and this also brings some additional input for the different decisions taken by ENQA and EQAR. If you move forward, please, I can show you what we did. We looked at the 49 agencies that were reviewed between 2016 and 2020, according to the SG 2015. Basically, we looked at the negative judgment decisions that have come either from ENQA or EQAR. There were about 132 judgment decisions that were negative. Of those decisions, ENQA and ENQAR only concurred in 46 cases, and for the other cases, what we had were non-concurrent decisions. And in those non-concurrent decisions, actually, EQAR decisions were less favorable in 80 cases and more favorable in 6 cases. And also, the interesting thing is that in 4 of those 6 cases where EQAR tends to be more favorable, the thing is that the agency, following the ENQA panel's review recommendation, had introduced some changes answering to the recommendations. So EQAR basically judged, including also those changes that have taken place. In the next slide, I show you, the next 2 slides show a grid that we have constructed, where you can see for each standard and for each agency those negative decisions. And in the case of the yellow ones, these are negative decisions where EQAR was somehow more rigorous, in the sense that the level of compliance given by EQAR was lower than the level of compliance given by ENQA. And the red ones are the decisions where ENQA was more rigorous. So if you can see in these and in the next slide, we have several yellow marks showing the EQAR more rigorous decision, and also a small number of red marks. And you also can see that there are some standards that tend to be more problematic, meaning that they get more negative decisions on the level of compliance of the agencies. The next slide shows a graph where you can see those most critical ESG. 3 of them are part of the ESG part 3, 3.1, 3.3, 3.4, and the other 3 are part of the ESG part 2. What we did next was to make an analysis of the decisions looking at the more critical standards. So we looked at the decisions written, and for each standard, we tried to figure out what was the main message for the negative decision, let's say. So we have 14 cases where there was a negative decision regarding standard 3.1. And basically what was said is that the activities of quality assurance agencies tended to be a matter of significant disagreement between ENQA and EQAR, and the latter as a more strict view of what falls within the scope of the ESG. So EQAR tends to have a more restrictive view on what constitutes consultancy services, for instance, and imposed the use of ESG even when a European quality assurance agency collaborates with institutions or governments outside the European higher education area. And this might, to a certain extent, create some problems to the agencies. Regarding the standard 3.2, in the next 3.4, sorry, in the next slide, the thematic analysis, there were 14 cases where a negative decision was reached, and in this case, in 3 cases, ENQA was in this less favorable than EQAR. And in 2 of those, as I already mentioned, the Register Committee took into consideration the changes introduced by the agency in answer to ENQA panel's recommendation. In other case, the agency actually did not analyze the results from institutional and program reviews, but it explained that it did not interpret Standard 3.4 to explicitly require analysis based on external review reports, although it agreed, of course, on the importance of these findings. As for Standard 3.3, in the next slide, we had 9 cases of negative decisions. EQAR committee did not concur with the opinion of ENQA's review panel that the reviewed agencies were in substantial or full compliance with the standard. Most cases have been observed for the Spanish regional accreditation agencies, and EQAR considered that the legislation did not protect the agency from the interference of local authorities. In another case, the committee noted that there was a lack of clear safeguards to prevent possible interference in the activity of the agency or in the dismissal of its board members. As for standards of Part 2, in the next slide, we have 2.7 complaints and appeals. This is a particularly critical standard, let's say, where there are 23 negative decisions when analyzing the results. And EQAR basically considered that in a number of agencies, the composition of the Board of Appeals did not ensure its full independence. In one case, the members were there for short term, so it did not ensure that they gain a broad overview of decisions made. In another case, the appeals committee could make recommendations but no binding decisions. And in several cases, the agency did not have a clear, structured, and effective complaints process. And finally, for standard 2.6 on reporting, not finally, we still have 2.4. EQAR tends to make a rigid interpretation of this standard and considers that all full reports by the experts should be published, including the ones that result from ex-ante evaluations. And we wonder if this should actually be the case, because somehow shouldn't agencies also protect higher education institutions' good name? And as such, maybe it's more interesting if they try to make institutions improve the programs that they are trying to develop for the first time. In standard 2.4, the peer review experts, there were 11 cases where there was indeed negative decisions, and in this case it was the lack of student participation that was a recurrent theme throughout deliberations of EQAR, and in this case also of ENQA. Dsg tend to only consider as mandatory the presence of students in the external review teams, but ENQA and EQAR recommend to include students also in the decision-making bodies of quality assurance agencies. This case, we looked at the decisions, and that we wonder, in the case, for instance, of prior accreditation of new study programs, what is indeed the role of students in this case? There are no classes yet, there are no students yet, so should they actually be included in every single process, single activity that goes on in the quality assurance agencies? So in brief, in the next slide, we notice that there is interference with the agency's activities, even if they take place outside the European higher education area, or if they refer to strict consultancy activities. We notice that agencies are not always clear about the nature of their activities, so there's some clear lack of clearness in the terminology used, and the terms like evaluation, review, audit, assessment, or accreditation sometimes are used under ESG type activities, but sometimes are used under other type of activities. There's probably an eventually excessive emphasis on the universal presence of students, even when their presence does not seem to contribute to significant added value. And there is an excessively rigid interpretation of DSG, and this may compromise the enhancement purpose of quality assurance. This in brief was what we found out from our analysis. But actually, we looked in 2020, the EQAR has published a new version on the interpretation of DSG. Can you move the slide, please? And it somehow brings brings some changes and brings some clarifications, or introduces changes and clarifications that better allows the panel reviews and the agencies to understand how EQAR interprets the ESG. And we think that this may be really helpful also for avoiding probably in the future these non-concurrent decisions. Essentially, they stress that the guidelines themselves are not requirements, the guidelines on the ESG, which is good because it allows for some flexibility. Plus, in the next slide, we try to put together some of the issues this new version of the interpretation of the Dsg brings, and we think that it brings some clarity also on the review process of the agencies against the ESG. So, for instance, program is understood in the broadest sense, including also online and blended learning. The ESG applied to all higher education institutions, and this includes transnational and cross-border provision. There is scope for more flexibility, especially in the cases of when the agencies perform activities as subcontractors for other higher education systems, other countries. There is the clearness that when the agencies, when institutions or non-European higher education institutions are looking for an European label, then agencies should actually work in compliance with the ESG. There is this enforcement of the need to avoid confusion if and when agencies use the typical terms. And also there are a scope for other activities, but agencies need to be clear about what activities are ESG type and what activities are non-ESG type, namely what activities are indeed consultancy activities. So, and overall, we would like to finalize this presentation with some final remarks. And the first one would be if this issue of non-concurrent decision, if it is really an issue, or if we can live with it, because in the end, and although there were non-concurrent decisions, basically all agencies ended up being registered in the EQAR and members and accepted as members of ENQA. Anyway, we also think that somehow it may be problematic that two different decisions can be made based on the results of the same review. So actually there are differences in ESG interpretation by ENQA and EQAR, and these differences probably should be made clear to the agencies and the review panels. So dissemination of the 2020 ESG interpretation by EQAR among review panels and agencies could be an option, and perhaps ENQA should also make its own interpretation of the ESG, or otherwise ENQA and EQAR could come to a shared interpretation of the ESG. And just to finalize and open up the space for the discussion that we want to have in this seminar, a question mark for this seminar in the next slide. And it has to do with the roles that both organizations play in quality assurance in the European higher education area. Both organizations are obviously quite relevant, but somehow their role is overlapping, and this may cause some confusion. So would it be a solution for the future that EQAR would cater for quality assurance as compliance, and ENQA would foster the development of mechanisms able to contribute to the enhancement of quality assurance agencies' practices? And I leave with this question mark, and hopefully this is the beginning of a very profitable debate. Martí?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maria João, for this brilliant, short but direct to the point presentation that puts on the table different aspects that the agencies and the different actors, well, ENQA and EQAR, have been dealing in the recent years. In fact, I think that many progress has been also done. In this sense, thank you very much. If I remember everyone that the paper, the slides, they are available on the website if you want to download. And also, if you have any questions, please put on on the chat, and we introduced it during the debate. So in that sense, there is nothing better than, after these questions of Maria João, than having among us the newly appointed president of ENQA and chief executive officer of the QAA, Douglas Blackstock, and the executive director of EQAR, Colin Tück. Good afternoon to both of you. Your participation in the seminar is an honor for us. So we thank you very much. I will start with ENQA. So first of all, I would like to know what's your opinion, Douglas, about the results of the research developed by Maria João. But above all, taking advantage of your position as president of ENQA, what are your ideas and future plans regarding the alignment of ENQA and EQAR? And in summary, in the QA in Europe, in which obviously you will play a very, very relevant role.
Am I live now, Martí? Yeah?
Yeah.
Good. Firstly, thank you. Apologies for, there was a bit of a mix-up in time, so I was finishing lunch. I was finishing a coffee with a very nice mug from Cartagena. Colleagues, let me open by repeating what I said in my first newsletter as ENQA president. Quality assurance builds trust in higher education, and quality enhancement helps institutions to thrive. ENQA and its member agencies have a vital part in enabling international cooperation and the sharing of effective practice. That's why I'm happy to address this seminar today. And I would like to couch everything I say in the context of the Inca Strategy adopted by our members in April 2020. The first part is representing the interests of quality assurance agencies, and one of our points in there, number 2, is that ENQA supports the establishment and operation of independent and trustworthy quality assurance agencies operating on the basis of agreed standards. Our second big aim is providing services to members and other stakeholders. And the third aspect of that aim is ENQA's agency review programme is the preferred partner for reviews against the European standards and guidelines. And the third aim of our strategy is driving the development of external quality assurance. And 2 parts of that in 6 and 7 are ENQA works towards quality assurance for a purpose, and ENQA explores new ways of quality assurance. ENQA serves multiple purposes, and ENQA and EQAR have different but complementary, not competitive, roles. Both promote trust in external quality assurance, but EQAR is much more limited as it's a public register of compliant agencies, whereas with ENQA, compliance is just one aspect that we are interested in. The development of agencies, including those who are affiliates who have not yet reached full member status, and their practices is of significance to us. It is that broader role that perhaps ENQA helps ENQA to understand the flexibility of the ESG, which was really helpfully recently affirmed in the August 2020 statement by the E4 group called The ESG in the Changing Landscape of Higher Education, where it emphasised the flexibility of the ESG. But I recognise the tensions raised in the presentation we've just had. Over a couple of years, through conversations with my counterparts as chief executives and directors of agencies, I became aware that there were concerns about the way the agency review process was evolving. And at the ENQA Members Forum in Tallinn in Estonia in April 2019, I was on the final panel discussion, and I raised 3 points as part of my presentation that I think are worth reiterating. EQAR's decision to adopt an interpretation of the ESG has caused some tension and concerned some colleagues that it was far too rigid. Now, I can understand why the Register Committee needs to understand the ESG. It's got to take really important decisions. But can one actor, on their own, choose to interpret a set of standards carefully crafted in partnership by a range of stakeholders across the European higher education area? Does this, in effect, redefine the ESG away from the original purpose and into a much narrower scope than the authors and the approvers had intended? I also reflected on my own QA's most recent review had been the least valuable of the 3 reviews I've experienced, partly because some panel members strayed out of scope. I don't understand why they wanted to know about Brexit. I didn't know what was happening either. But it also felt to us it had become a checklist for EQAR purposes rather than a conversation about how an agency is operating in the context of the ESG. And also my third point, that we need to be clear on the difference between the standards and the guidelines. And I quoted a former chief executive of QA who also always talked about Captain Jack in Pirates of the Caribbean. When he was charged with breaching the Pirates Code, he responded by saying, well, it's not really a code, it's more of a set of guidelines. And I have to say that Karl Dietrich, EQAR president, engaged in that discussion in a way that was open and clearly recognising there were issues that needed to be discussed. And after I joined the ENQA board in late 2019, I got involved in the working group involving the agency review process for ENQA, but also joined the small working group of ENQA and EQAR. And I think colleagues in EQAR have come a very long way with the proposal on targeted reviews, which was overwhelmingly adopted at the EQAR General Assembly and the ENQA General Assembly. I think this reflects that EQAR are in listening mode. But together, we now need to work together to make sure that the dialogue is positive and implement that new process. But I'm much more interested, actually, about the evolution of quality assurance. The external quality assurance of the agencies matters to institutions, and potentially negatively if the way we use reviews of agencies gets in the way of innovation. Why might approaches to quality assurance change? Well, the tools we have available now are much more sophisticated than in 2005 when the ESG were adopted, largely driven by the academic audit model of the early 1990s. There are also critics of external quality assurance who say we look too much at process and not enough at the outcomes for students and society. I personally think it isn't one or the other. Both of those issues matter. You can seldom get a good outcome without a decent process. Another criticism I have heard directly pinned at my agency is that agencies are wedded to cyclical review because it is their core business model and revenue stream, and they can't think outside that approach. We now have big data, often real time. We have artificial intelligence. Student engagement is much more sophisticated than feedback surveys. All students are on social media. We did a pilot in the UK and found that the comments on social media about institutions broadly matched the outcomes of our reviews. Are there other ways to do quality assurance? And in terms of judging agencies, which of course we have the ENQA review process and EQA make registration decisions, we all have to understand that not all agencies are the same. Some have been around 30 years and have had repeated cycles of review. Some haven't completed the first cycle. Lots of agencies do enhancement work as a core part of the business, supporting their institutions. Conflicts of interest can arise, but they can also be managed. Some have developed sophisticated annual monitoring, which triggers interventions, including risk-based approaches. Some do evaluation, others accreditation. Some agencies advise regulators, some are the regulators. Some are regional, some are national, some are international. Some have a monopoly and others compete in a market. Some are state funded, some solely get by on review fees. Some are ministry bodies, some are charities, and some have multiple approaches to EQA. So we in QA and our predecessor bodies have been doing quality assurance in the UK since 1992, but in the polytechnic sector since the 1970s. 5 or 6 cycles of review in some parts. But we now operate differently even within one nation. We do enhancement-led approaches in Scotland, risk-based in Northern Ireland, enhancement and assurance in Wales, and principles-based regulation in England. The thing I'd say about the ESG, they are a remarkable achievement, and I'm very proud that QA colleagues contributed to both the 2005 and 2015 versions, as of course did ENQA and its board. Bringing together 49 countries with different legal, political, cultural and language contexts is wonderful and has influenced developments in the ASEAN region and in Africa. But we now have to evolve to facilitate A, innovation, B, diversity, and C, experimentation. If they don't, we do risk to become a problem rather than the solution. Of course, we will need to ensure that there are core principles: peer review, autonomy of institutions, student engagement, transparency of reporting are maintained. But so today we progress a really welcome conversation about what different might look like and how difference can be good. And when we go forward, we should do so together, constructively and with space for views and variety, both ENQA and EQAR have a positive role to play. So what I said, go back to what I said at the beginning about assurance and enhancement. I'd finish by saying that assurance and enhancement are not mutually exclusive. Each can inform the other, and a rigid view of the European standards and guidelines can get in the way of progress. Thank you, Martí.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Very interesting, your point. Well, the point of ENQA also. Now it's Colin's turn, and I will simply ask you with the same question that Maria João Rosa has asked us at the end of the presentation. If you remember, she said, will it be a solution for the future that EQAR will cater for QA as compliance, while ENQA will foster the development of mechanisms able to contribute to the enhancement of QA agencies' practices?
Thank you, Martí, for posing that question, and thank you, Maria João, for the great overview of your analysis, and Douglas for your comments already. And I think thinking about Maria João's question, I would actually go back to one question she asked before: is it really a problem? And I would be inclined to say no, it's not really a problem, because the answer to the last question that you just repeated would be, I mean, that's already what our roles are, because it is already the case that EQAR is the official register for the European higher education area, and our role is to check compliance, and Douglas just reaffirmed that as well. And that register has been created to ensure trust and recognition in the EHEA, and also to make sure that our different systems are comparable, and that we have a certain level of harmonization in our quality assurance systems to be able to trust each other in the European higher education area, and to facilitate international cooperation and recognition. And for that, of course, it's crucially important that we are first and foremost fair and consistent in our own decision. Which of course can sometimes mean that we might reach a different conclusion than the review panel. But that's, I mean, since most of the audience are from quality assurance agencies, I think you all know that that's a completely normal part of any peer review process. All of the agencies have decision-making bodies that might sometimes divert from what a panel has recommended as a decision. And if you look at what we have to work with, the ESG are the benchmark we have to use. They are the agreed standards. They have been agreed not only by the stakeholders, but by almost 50 ministries. And the latest 2015 version is much better in terms of clarity, but it still leaves a lot of room for interpretation. And it is our job as the register to interpret the ESG where they leave that room. And we are trying really our best to make that as transparent as possible when we have to do that, because it's an unavoidable part of our work. In that regard, I'm actually very happy that the recent version of our use and interpretation document was also seen as a contribution to that. And of course, when that was drafted, I mean, all stakeholders had the opportunity to comment on that and on the previous version. It doesn't necessarily mean that all comments are taken into account. I think that's logical considering the Register Committee's independent position in this field, but it's of course discussed with all stakeholders. And I also think in reality, we have basically the Register Committee concurs with the review panels in 83% of cases. So I think it was presented a little bit as an inflated issue before, like by looking only at the negative decisions. And I think it neglects the fact that there are a few standards where that happens, but it also neglects the fact that in the vast majority of cases, there's not even there's a disagreement here. And as has been pointed out, also by Melinda already in the chat, we are monitoring this very intensely ourselves, and we're also going to publish an analysis on these issues. And I think on that point, I can really just say that our roles are different. I said EQAR is a register, ENQA is a membership-based organization. It's not primarily deciding about compliance, but makes a decision for an internal purpose, whereas our decision is one that is made for external purposes and has consequences in terms of recognition, in terms of programs and institutions being listed on our database of external quality assurance results. So I think they're very different in nature. So I think it's very logical that we might sometimes differ. And the new arrangements that Christina from HAC has already referred to in the chat, I think they're going to make things much clearer by the fact that they underline that the EQA Register Committee is really the EHEA body that's charged with deciding on compliance with the ESG. So if we look at the broader context in which all this takes place, I think one important thing is also to have in mind that we don't only have the register anymore, we have also the DECA database of external quality assured institutions and programs, and that has become a very important tool for the European higher education area and an authoritative source and used in recognition and other contexts. And that has underlined the need that we need to be very, very clear what is covered by EQA registration, what can carry the stamp ESG, EQA, and what ultimately ends up in the DECA database, and what isn't. So there are, of course, difficult cases and nuances, but in the end, this whole question of scope and activities is a black or white decision. We can't get around that. And we want to be absolutely sure that whatever carries the label of EQA and ends up in our pan-European database is done in line with the ESG, and at the same time that these labels, ESG and EQA, are not going to be used for any activities that are not actually within the scope of EQA registration, which are not actually in our overview. So I think this distinction is very important, but we also see that it's getting better and better to make that in practice. Douglas also referred to the very productive discussion we had on the future more targeted approach to reviews for those agencies that have already gone through 2 or more ESG reviews. And I think that's a very, very good step to make sure that we don't get into review fatigue, that we don't repeat the same thing over and over again, but that we really start to focus on those issues that warrant specific attention when we come to the 3rd or 4th time to one agency, and we don't repeat assessing the same areas over and over again where we know that everything was in order already for 10 years and nothing has changed. And at the same time, of course, it is important to bear in mind that the world is changing, and so quality assurance and higher education changing. If we bear in mind digitalization, micro-credentials becoming more widespread, the European universities, and so on and so forth. And that's something that we keep pointing out all the time. And I think it is true what Douglas said. The ESG are, of course, still very focused on very much rooted in a very classical model of peer review. And I think we can and should reflect on that all the time, whether that is still the most appropriate, how we articulate to other approaches to monitor and enhance quality in higher education. And we did seek this discussion with the stakeholders, with the E4 group last year, whether the ESG generally are fit for purpose, and we got a very unequivocal feedback, which is yes, they are. So I think that seems to be the consensus of the sector, and so we have to continue working on the basis of the ESG, while of course we can discuss and review and recalibrate that all the time. But of course, as long as the ESG are as they are our agreed standards and they are our binding principles. And of course, that is the standards. Maria made that very clear before, that standards are standards and guidelines are guidelines, and we shouldn't mix up these two things. But of course, as long as the standards are as they are, we cannot change them at our discretion, which means we can neither add something, but we can also not just take something away just because we feel it's not fitting the current time anymore. So I think we need to also keep the discussion alive about the ESG and the standards, and whether everything in there is our agreed principles, and whether something might at some point need to be added or removed. But that's of course a broader discussion that is not between ENQA and EQAR, but it's between ENQA and EQAR and the other stakeholders and the governments of the European higher education area. And one final point, I think, is that in addition to thinking about the standards, of course, we also have to keep reflecting about the general concept that we use. We are reviewing agencies. We have a register of agencies, which is very valuable for many partners, for many parties, and it's relied upon by many parties. But sometimes we also get to see the limitations of our institutional framework, if I may say, especially when we have not the one agency, one system direct match as we have in many countries. So we might also sometimes look more systematically at the system level, in addition to looking only at single agencies. And that's something that we also concluded in our recent self-evaluation, and we try to bear that in mind in our future work, to make sure that whatever we are discussing adequately reflects what's actually going on in the different higher education systems in Europe. So I think there's a lot of food for thought to keep the discussion on the future of quality assurance alive, and we look forward to doing that together with ENQA and all the other partners in the higher education area.
Yes, thank you very much, Colin. Yes, there is a lot of things to talk about, and I'm really happy that all the way we are aligned on the objectives for both of us. We are out of the time, but just one of the questions that this one from Raquel Santos about just from your perspective the limits between assessment and consultancy, because it's something that the agencies we are always dealing with, and it's clear that the ones who evaluate the agencies has to say something about that. Do you have 1 minute response for this question of Raquel?
You want to go first, Douglas?
Yeah.
Or?
To which one? Colin and I. You go first, Colin.
Well, for me, I think it's very simple. I think it's clear that every enhancement-oriented assessment always includes some suggestions for improvement. I think that's absolutely normal and absolutely desirable, and the ESG asks for that. But of course, when we say consultancy, we really mean like a paid service where someone from an agency would sit down with someone in an institution and give detailed guidance or co-create almost what an institution is doing, maybe an internal quality assurance system. And I think that's where the limit lies. I mean, of course, suggestions for improvement should be part of any process, but we cannot accept that an agency assesses something that it co-created itself. So there needs to be a clear boundary as soon as an agency would engage into co-creating a quality assurance system of an institution. It obviously cannot be a neutral assessor of that very same institution afterwards.
Thank you very much. Douglas, something to add? Or?
Yeah. I think if you're coaching an institution to get through the review, that's a problem, isn't it? So, but I'd look at it much more importantly. We do, lots of agencies do, but we in particular have an increasing focus on enhancement. And during the COVID pandemic, we produced over 30 resources for institutions to use in adjusting their learning and teaching provision, thinking about pedagogy, thinking about assessment, thinking about supporting students through it. You could take a rigid view that that's consultancy, although it's done collectively with the sector. I think that there are opportunities for what we have called in the UK, and I know other agencies have done, what we would call a developmental engagement. An institution may be a long way from getting to the point where it could receive a full endorsement either through quality assurance or accreditation. In fact, we've even got agencies like that in Europe. A developmental engagement helps an institution understand where it needs to get and take them on the journey. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think it's the word consultancy is perhaps too narrowly defined. I think the key thing is if you've got a different type of engagement with an institution other than assessment, there needs to be a clear policy on managing conflicts of interest. So, for example, one piece of work would have to be done by separate people, maybe in a separate part of the agency, and certainly wouldn't involve the people who'd be doing the assessment, and decision-making processes need to be separated. I think it's more sophisticated than a straight black and white rule. What we do, though, and it's really important, this is where EQAR is really important, is to retain trust in quality assurance agencies. It's really important that people don't get the impression that we mark our own homework.
Yeah. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry that we have to leave it here. It has been extremely interesting, but I'm sure that next part will also be very interesting. Thank you very much, Douglas and Colin. Your contribution has been really appreciated. And now we are going to the second part of the seminar.
Adios.
Thank you. Which the second part of the seminar will be led by Øystein Land, the Deputy Director General of NOKUT, as well as a member of the Deputy Director General of NOKUT Agency in Norway, as well as a member of the ENQA board. Good afternoon, Øystein. As you can see, that so the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I think I'm on now. Yes, it was something about the mic here, but now I'm on. Thank you very much, all of you, for taking part in this seminar and also bringing this topic up for discussion. We'll see also later on that there has been some developments in this area that's quite important to struggle with. And I will just point out that challenges for the quality assurance agencies is partly about the new situation that our institutions, our universities and university colleges and vocational institutions face due to the fact that the situation changes. But it's also a fact that the thing we are doing, what we call quality assurance, also is developing. And we are taking part in a development of other areas where quality assurance is not exactly the same as it was in 2005 and 2015, and we are still continuing to develop that. Right now, I will pass on the floor to, it was supposed to be two former presidents of ENQA, Achim Hopbach and Padraig Walsh. And we have decided, and they have decided, that it is Padraig that will give the presentation. And I will not spend too much time telling you who he is. You will listen to him and you will get many good words. Padraig, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Øystein. Can we bring up the slides, please? Can we run back to the start, please? That's about the third slide, I think. Great, thanks very much. As Øystein has pointed out, this is a paper that myself and Achim worked on, but we decided that I would make the actual presentation. It covers some of the area that's already been covered and maybe sets it out in the context as to how we got to the particular position that we've gotten to. There's a wider paper that we've written on this that is available online that I invite people to have a look at. There's some helpful references, I think, in there as well. And really what I'm going to do is just summarize what's in there. But the first slide, please. For those of you familiar with the movie Point Break, you know who the ex-presidents are. You can decide whether Achim or I or Richard Nixon or Ronald Reagan there. But it's more really that we're giving this from the point of view of people who were at the helm of ENQA for an 8-year period between 2009 and 2017, and would have seen over that time, really, that since almost the establishment of the register, the various challenges that have been alluded to in relation to the two bodies and what impact that has had. And I'll take you through that story, which is coming to, I think, a positive or a happy end, like almost any good fairy tale. Could we have the next slide, please? I mean, I think it's universally acknowledged that the implementation of the European standards and guidelines is seen as a key success story of the Bologna process, and that in particular, that the external evaluation of agencies that the majority of us here have undergone has become one of the most powerful triggers for the actual implementation of the European standards and guideline at national and institutional level. And it was therefore of concern that an inconsistent approach to those reviews, apparently by ENQA and EQAR, comes through as a recurring theme of a 2019 external report. Next slide, please. One of the lines from the Norwegian Institute report says, I suppose as a truism, the fact that two different decisions can be made based on the results of the same review is problematic. And this echoed with the 2020 E4 report that the interpretation of the European standards and guidelines and its individual standards is often too restrictive, and the scope for going beyond the standards is not exploited. Next slide, please. So a closer look at the problem, and I use quotations there, and Colin and Douglas will have alluded to that as well, and to the very useful presentation that was made earlier from the Portuguese agency A3ES. So the survey and the consistency we find out really shows that the consequence of the judgments really may not be as severe as the initial statements from some agencies who've been frustrated by the process seem to indicate. And one of the main challenges around this could have to do that 2 different rating scales were used, where ENQA was using a 4-scale system, which included a substantial compliance judgment, and where the EQAR Register Committee was using a 3-point scale. However, if you go into the results, as Marie-José looked at there, in 85 cases of difference, 5 related to a difference of full versus substantial compliance, and 61 to substantial versus partial compliance. Well, EQAR, the Register Committee could not have made a substantial judgment compliance because it wasn't one of their criteria. The more severe difference between, say, full and partial compliance, or 2 degrees difference, or partial versus non-compliance, which is a fail versus a bare pass, only occurred in 13 cases. The next slide, please. So perhaps the problem results from different uses or approaches to agency reviews. And I think Douglas and Colin have kind of set out the stalls of the bodies. It's key, if you look at ENQA's vision and mission, that words that come out are the development of quality assurance, representation of agencies, the development of a quality culture for ENQA, whereas EQAR's vision and mission use terms like a coherent quality assurance framework, the importance of a higher education institution having freedom of choice of agency to undertake a review, transparency, and information. Next slide, please. So we can clearly say that ENQA is focused on the development of quality assurance, and as a member organisation, its member agencies. Whereas EQAR is necessarily focused on transparency, and particularly on the importance that quality assurance decisions should be mutually acceptable. And I think Colin had outlined the role of the database as well as the agency evaluations there. So ENQA, as a membership organisation, has to focus on the agency as a whole, whereas EQAR understandably has to focus on the procedures and decisions. Now, if you go back and look at what Øystein was talking about, many ENQA agencies do more than evaluations of higher education institutions. So looking at a membership organisation as an agency is slightly different to just looking at the European standards and guidelines for quality assurance. Next slide, please. So moving away from the double decision, I've always set this up as, you know, an outsider posing the question, why do we have to sit the examination twice? Once by the Register Committee, once by the ENQA board. And I've answered it that you're not really sitting the examination twice. You're sitting the exam once, which is the review, but it's being marked twice, and perhaps by examiners with a different lens. The next slide, please. And some of this has to go back to looking at the origins of EQAR. When the idea of agency reviews first surfaced in the wider 2005 ESG document about a potential, an appendix in there about a potential review process for agency, there was honestly some skepticism from both the European University Association and the European Students' Union about vesting this review process solely with ENQA. And this ultimately led to EQAR being established in 2008, with 4 founding members, EUA, EURATRI, ESU, and ENQA, and then the other members being the governmental members who were added later. Next slide, please. So over time, remember in 2008, there were no EQAR registered agencies, but there were 30-odd ENQA agencies. So you had a non-intersecting circles. But over time, many agencies had relationships with both ENQA and EQAR. And a rapprochement over time between the tensions that were there has developed with the development of ESG 2015, moving from just being the 4 organizations to including Education International, representing the teachers, Business Europe, representing stakeholders, and EQAR in that development. Regular E4 meetings at which EQUAR attended, which I attended many of in Brussels. Regular meetings between the EQUAR and ENQA presidencies and the Secretariat. So the director of ENQA, the president, and the two vice presidents would meet with the president of EQUAR and the director. Agreed terms of reference being conducted where the double purpose of an ENQA membership and EQUAR registration was outlined at the beginning. So the agency clearly said that the review was being undertaken for both those purposes, and that the briefing of the ENQA review panels included a briefing on the expectations, the use and interpretation document of EQUAR. Next slide, please. So we find ourselves now moving towards this targeted review process that was taken earlier. In 2021, ENQA had 54 member agencies that were, what you could term, full members, and 2 that were under review that still had to go through a further process. And there are 50 agencies registered on EQUAR. Of the 56 ENQA members, 48 are also registered on EQUAR. So you have almost complete intersection of the two agencies. However, ENQA is the main coordinator of reviews against the ESG with 56 members, is close to looking at 11 coordinated reviews every year. Having been on the ENQA board for a 7-year period and having been president for 4 years, a huge amount of the work of the board ended up being consideration of the outcome of the reviews. And the outcome of those reviews, not just by but by scrutiny committees that fed into the board. That left less and less time for membership development matters, which was a key consideration for the ENQA board. Next slide, please. Many ENQA members now, however, have undergone 2 or more reviews, or in some cases, 3 reviews whereby an agency was merged and had previously been reviewed. And there's clear evidence of evaluation fatigue and diminishing returns. Douglas pointed out earlier that the 3rd review that QAA did, he felt was the least helpful to them. And that there was a real desire has come from mature agencies to have an evaluation process that has to move beyond simple threshold standards, such as, is this a legal agency? And to focus more on enhancement, but particularly on innovation and quality assurance. And again, Douglas alluded to many things that agencies are now doing beyond simply accreditation at program or institutional evaluation. Next slide, please. And gladly, I think we are able to report that in October 2020, ENQA was moved to accepting a positive decision of the EQUAR Register Committee as fulfilling ENQA membership criteria. It's still open to agencies to apply to ENQA directly and not want to be registered, but in the majority case, as I've previously described, there's a huge element of overlap there. ENQA also moved from 4-point to a 3-point compliance scale, dropping the substantial compliance judgment. And I think that will make it easier for panels to make a judgment of full compliance in some cases. The EQUAR Members Forum agreed in April 2021 to permit agencies that have undergone 2 successful reviews against ESG 2012 to undertake a targeted review 5 years in between full 10-year reviews, and that an enhancement-led component will be part of that targeted review. And that targeted review process was also endorsed by the ENQA General Assembly in April 2021. Next slide, please. So, as a denouement then, we really have pretty much removed the double decision. Of course, the challenge can be, the question that could be asked is, has the decision-making process just become slightly more opaque? Because remember, ENQA still organises most of the reviews, will still train and brief the panel members, will still pre-screen the self-evaluation reports and screen the final reports as well. Next slide, please. So the question that really has to be asked is, if agencies are seeing review fatigue and diminishing returns, should we still be requiring mature higher education institutions to continue undergoing the same type of cyclical review? Again, Douglas talked about his own experience, but there are many universities in the UK that went through a process of 4 or 5 cyclical reviews. In Ireland, we're going through our 3rd process of cyclical reviews, and I honestly have to say as well that I think we probably in some cases have reached the point of diminishing returns, where the best outcome from a review is along the lines of not too much to see here, because really there isn't a huge amount that is good that has gone beyond that. So if we're expecting to have enhancement and innovation as part of the agency reviews, surely that means that the reviews of institutions and how we do that will have to change. And I know in QQI, in relation to the development of our own strategic plan, we haven't talked about the concept of the next cycle of reviews, because really we're hoping that the next time that we look at this process, we'll have moved on somewhat from the cyclical review process. We had ESG in 2005. We had a revision in 2015. Is 2025 the time we should be aiming at to look at a newer process? I leave that with you. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Austin, we cannot listen to you. You have to...
I have to do the unmute.
No, sorry, you have to repeat it. Sorry.
Then I start over again and say to Padraig, thank you very much for these valuable inputs. Thank you for bringing a very clear picture to what is the challenges concerning review of the agencies, and also how the development really gives us new challenges that we need to take into account. We have done, and I think that's very important to stress, what ENQA and EQAR has been doing the last year has been very valuable, as you also pointed out. And I find that the discussion for the years to come, up to 2025, and also how will quality assurance look like in 2025, not only how will the institutions look like in 2025, will be valuable for us. I think we need to move on to try to get into this schedule. You're not the one who went over the line, Padraig, so thank you for really keeping that. And I thank you very much for your presentation so far. And it will also be the paper you have been writing together with Achim. Is that to be put out somewhere that we can find it? No, you are not. You are muted.
Sorry, we sent it through to the AQU Secretariat, so I'm hoping it can be put up online. If not, we can certainly make it available on Twitter if you like. So.
Very good. Thank you for that. Then I think we move on to the next topic that we are going to put up for discussion. And then after that, having a discussion with 4 persons in a small panel. The next speaker is Bjørn Stensaker, who is Professor of Higher Education and Director of LINK, the Center of Learning, Innovation and Academic Development at University of Oslo. He will present a small study which he and colleagues did for NOKUT on various advanced agencies in Europe developing new tasks and roles. Bjørn, I give you the floor.
Oh, thank you very much. And thanks for inviting me to the seminar here today. If I could get my slides, please. I will do a small presentation, and I promise you it won't take a long time. But I think it ties nicely into the discussion so far. I mean, so far we've heard on the European level of how the European standards and guidelines have been interpreted, and how they have been also developed more recently. And which is kind of interesting, but my presentation is more going down to the agency level and to provide you a little bit of a glimpse of how this situation look like from an agency perspective. And this is a study I did with a good colleague of mine, Mari Elkin at NIFU, and we call it Exploring Opportunities, Innovative Practices in Higher Education Quality Assurance. So next slide, please. And basically, we ask 2 very simple questions. What are these new tasks and roles of quality assurance that we hear about in higher education, and that, for example, Douglas and Padraig also talked about? And what are the key factors driving these changes in higher education? And are we able to see some potential impact on this development also in the future? Next slide, please. Of course, we have an expert audience here today, so I won't go much into this. I think the key word here is more uncertainty. Yes, we have seen that the European standards and guidelines in many ways have served us well over the almost last 20 years. At the same time, we see that for higher education or for quality assurance agency, they are not only serving one master, they are not only serving the ESG, they serve several masters. And we do see in so many countries that national jurisdiction is so important for quality assurance agencies in different countries, and that national agendas, they matter a lot. And of course, I again, given that you are living the life inside in quality assurance agency, I think you all have experienced that quality assurance can sometimes also be an instrument for political opportunism, where new governments come in and want to do dramatic changes in the way that quality assurance is conducted, not least because it's much easier to change quality assurance than it is to improve quality. And we all, I think, acknowledge that quality assurance has been pressured by other types of developments during the last decades. You have new players entering the fields, global rankings. There are always complaints about the bureaucratic element of quality assurance. And we see that quality assurance in various ways are intertwined either directly or indirectly with national reform attempts. Next slide, please. Again, I won't go much into this, but bear in mind that there are some interesting, theoretical assumptions that you could make here as well to try to understand how agencies are trying to maneuver in this situation with a high level of uncertainty. And of course, if we go to the literature on intermediate agencies in Europe, there is this concept of agency drift, where the logic is that agencies, once established, they have an incentive to take up new roles, to take up new tasks, and to try to cater for new responsibilities, perhaps driving them towards more diversity, to driving them into a position where they are very unique. At the same time, we have the European development, where Europeanization, European standards and guidelines also come in. And triggering a situation where you could actually have more standardization and more diversity taking place simultaneously, and of course that is a challenging situation for the agencies to handle. In this paper, and the paper is free to download afterwards, we argue that for agencies then there are only basically two strategic directions that they could take. Either they could go in and do undertake new tasks, or they could enter into new fields. So let's have a look into some examples here. Next slide, please. Just a few words on the study. This study was funded by NOKUT, and partly it was meant as an input to their own strategic process. And when they are developing a strategic plan, they are of course interested in looking out to Europe to also try to understand how the field is evolving. What we did was we mapped interesting cases. Interesting in the sense that we are not claiming that these are the only agencies in Europe that are doing interesting things. Far from it. I think we have a number of interesting cases that are also going beyond the one that we have identified here. But we ended up with 6 agencies that we think have gone into or developed interesting roles, tasks, and perhaps even entered into new fields during the latter years. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Just to, again, you could read the results for yourself. Just a few glimpses of what we see are interesting new developments at agency level. If we go to Portugal, A3ES, I mean, they have for a long time had this very clear leg inside research and analysis, which they have been able to develop in close collaboration with this independent research center called CIPES. And we heard, of course, Maria João presenting earlier exactly from that center. And that provide the agency with a different role, a different take also to undertake new tasks also in the future. We see a little bit of the same also when we go to Everlag in Germany, of course, one of 10 agencies operating in this federal system. But the unique element of Everlag is perhaps that they have a very strong profile in, perhaps not in applied research, but in consultancy and in development projects, where they not least are using Erasmus Plus as a funding opportunity to drive development also in the sector. Next slide, please. If we go to Finland, a different story emerges. I mean, FinHEC was for many years a very small and focused agency. They outsourced a lot of their responsibility to academics that was basically doing most of the job. But in 2014, we saw that they were exposed to a merger, which also enabled them to expand their activity. They were actually going into a new field, namely the field of primary and upper secondary education, also enabling them to undertake cross-sectoral evaluations. We can go to NDIO in the Netherlands and Flanders, and of course this you could argue that especially in the light of European universities, this is an agency whose time have come, where it operates literally across borders. The interesting aspect with this agency is, of course, the new approach that we see in Flanders, this appreciative approach, which is basically especially related, it's especially interesting in relation to European standards and guidelines, where they deliberately want to move away from standards and compliance orientation more into inquiry-driven methods, where there are few templates, where there is no clear ambition of doing comparisons. Next slide, please. We can go to Ireland, where we see QQI with traditionally having a very strong focus on qualifications and having a key role in the national qualification framework. But in the last couple of years, we also see that this agency is actually also taking on a new regulative role, which is kind of interesting, including actually undertaking evaluation activities when it comes to the funding and financial viability of higher education providers, which is, I think, quite a different step than what we find in many other agencies. And finally, let's go to Sweden. EQAR. Sweden has, of course, they have a long history in quality assurance, experienced a lot of political turmoil over the time, but this new body, EQAR, I think what's interesting with them is again that they have tasks that go beyond the traditional quality assurance. For example, when it comes to responsibility in producing national statistics, and a very interesting pilot case study that they are and have been undertaking for the last couple of years, where they also want to go into the research area, an area where at least many traditional quality assurance agencies have not entered into. Next slide, please. So where do we stand? Where do we go? Do we see incrementalism? Do we see innovation? Do we see transformation? I think the answer is yes to everything. And to state the obvious, change is, of course, the new normal. But what we do see, and I think is very important to understand why agencies are trying to put these agendas onto the European debate, is that they do feel that the current situation is challenging for them, where you have European standards and guidelines operating on the one hand, and where you have national regulations and where you have national authorities also pushing them, steering them, sometimes commanding them into take on new tasks. So we see a very dynamic picture here that is indeed very challenging from the agency point of view. So I think, again, going back to the empirical part here, we do see a lot of agencies that are moving beyond, especially the mature ones. They are moving beyond the traditional ways of understanding quality assurance, and they are actually actively undertaking a lot of new roles, and sometimes they are also enter into new fields, which I think is very interesting in relation to the discussion that we are having here today. So I will end with a question. Perhaps our definition of a quality agency and what a quality assurance agency is in flux. The final slide is just for those that want to download the report, and if you do, it's free to download. So have a nice reading, and do provide feedback if you want to. Thank you. Back to you, Øystein.
Thank you very much, Björn, for this very good inputs, and also for bringing up to us the necessity of really understanding what's going on in the different countries when it comes to what quality assurance is about, what it's going to assure, and also how it is going to assure it. And I'm quite sure that that discussion will continue. And for me, it's quite important that the ESG and also the bodies of EQAR and ENQA will take up these developments, also trying not to be the ones keeping the development back. It's quite important that we really have this discussion from time to time. So thank you very much, Björn. And I think we now move on to our last part of the program, where we have invited 4 very important stakeholders, or not only stakeholders, but the main, not only suspects, but the main persons or the main organizations really representing those for whom quality assurance is very important. So I just very shortly present to you Tia Lokula, Director of Institutional Development at the European University Association, EUA. Armando Pires, President of the European Association of Institutions in Higher Education, Russia. Jakub Bonecki, Vice President of the European Students' Union, ESU. And Clara Engels-Perny, Policy Officer, not Police Officer, but Policy Officer at the European Commission. Welcome to all of you, and I'm now interested in getting responses from all of you. We will try to do it that way, that you first will have up to 2 minutes to give feedback or comments on what you have heard so long, or to quality assurance in the future. And then I will try to get some points from some of you in the feed. So if you write in the feed questions that you want to have discussed in the panel discussion, you're more than welcome to do that. And then I give first the floor for a little comment to Tia. Please.
Oh, thank you, Øystein. Thank you for being able to go first. I do want to say my short comment by complimenting all the speakers before me. I think they have done an excellent job discussing a very specialized or technical matters in a way that I do get the feeling that even those who are not so insiders in our quality assurance circles would understand what we're talking about. So excellent presentations. Is the conversation relevant to higher education institutions, though? This is what I would, as being here for the universities, I would ask myself. And I would say large part of this probably isn't that relevant. for an institution where they work with a quality assurance agency, probably the end result of what ENQA or EQAR say as a result of their interpretation of the ESG is the most important thing. Is the quality assurance agency listed in EQAR or not? Is it member of ENQA or not? Whether it's this or that grading might not be so important. But I would say that one thing about this conversation really rings a bell from a university perspective. It is the discussion about the fatigue, what was it, review fatigue, diminishing returns as we go through a lot of agency reviews. I would say that a lot of the things that have been said, many of the universities would say the same thing, just like Padraig said as an example from the IRIS system. So I think we do need to think about this. How do we reform quality assurance? Whether it's at how we look at the external quality assurance, but also how external quality assurance looks at the internal quality assurance. So I think there are valid points that are also relevant to institutions made in this conversation.
Thank you very much, Tia. And we give on the floor to Armando Pires. Please.
Thank you, Einstein. I hope you can hear me. Good afternoon, everyone. I want to start by, of course, saying thank you to the organizers for inviting EURASHI to this webinar. EURASHI as a member of the E4 group, and of course to comment on and to reflect on the future of European quality assurance. And I would like to start also saying that, and briefly, and I would like to highlight, as a matter of fact, all the work and progress that has been done and achieved over the past decades to improve the quality of higher education in Europe. What we have today is incomparable better than the situation we had, for instance, two decades ago. Well, if I may, I would like to give you my personal view on this, what seems to be the main issue of this webinar, and that was pointed during particularly the first part of the webinar. And I would like to say that. Well, having ENQA and EQAR different missions, and they do have, but with the same major goal. I think they should, of course, articulate and harmonize their activities in order not to duplicate or, well, overlap the efforts, the tasks, and the procedures. And I would remind you what we can see on the website of ENQA. It is written there that ENQA agency reviews are designed to meet the expectations of EQAR for the purpose of registration. So I think this, I'm not technically prepared to discuss the details, but I think this should be achieved. The main point, I don't know, Øystein, if I may proceed, or shall I stop and then, because I'd like to say something regarding, of course, the professional higher education also, and what is linked with it. Can I do it now?
I don't have the mic yet, so if it suits to do it now, you do it now. Then okay. Just try to keep it short, and then we discuss on further on. Come on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Well, I want to say that ERASHI is, of course, fully committed with the D4 statement of August 2020 regarding the ESG in the changing landscape of higher education. And we do believe that the ESG are still valid and relevant in the current higher education landscape. Once ESG is about quality assurance related to learning and teaching in higher education, including the learning environment and the relevant links to research and innovation. This is written on the statement. And saying this doesn't mean that we do not have concerns about following and implementing the ESGs in every country, and about questions regarding the DNA of professional education, namely questions related with the regional engagement of this kind of institutions, also the sustainability, and I think it's one major issue is the growing importance of the link between education and research. And we can also see that in the policy from the European Commission, and the Commissioner Gabriel always referred that. And we think that this should be considered and assessed, and of course, taking into account on the quality assurance process. So for now, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armando. We'll get back to discussing what we find most important for the future in just a short while. First, I give the floor to Jakob Jodecki from ESU. Floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to give a short, basically, point of view from the student's perspective on the quality assurance systems that we are currently existing. And it's worth to actually mention that students and learners that are entering the system of education right now are facing the system as it is. They don't know the whole evolution that happened before. So it's worth to mention that this is a starting point for all of them. I think it's important to reiterate here, bearing in mind students' perspective as well, that the evolution of quality assurance system and ESGs themselves are and gives very high value for students and their involvement across institutions in European higher education area systems. And from our perspective, due to the developments of the ESGs and the quality assurance systems, in many cases, in many countries, students sometimes were for the first time structurally involved in their institution faculties to give a feedback. And this is still actually a situation in many of the places. So the worth in itself, it's very high. Of course, the level of participation varies, and this level of satisfaction and the goals itself are different as well in the different settings. But looking at the practical outcomes coming from the reviews and the raise of trust between the stakeholders, thanks to the quality assurance systems, and I'm talking here definitely from the student's perspective, we tend to believe that it has done a meaningful contribution to the student situation. But that's about the past, basically. We still see many challenges that are persisting, showing the students what is the added value of the quality assurance processes. There is always this question whether we consider this very formal engagement and the quality assurance systems with the real outcomes for the students. So there is a lot of work to be done on communicating the outcomes of the quality assurance results, communicating the results of the monitoring, and actually also getting the understanding with the students' community on why this constant monitoring is actually taking place. But for students, I think the ultimate goal of the learning itself and education, when it comes to quality assurance, still will be related to the process of enhancing learning and teaching. And we have their standards connected with student-centered learning, with the admission, progression, learning resources, and student support. So definitely the challenges, the societal challenges which the society, which is rapidly changing, is facing, I think they're quite positively might be embedded with some points existing in there. So also from the perspective of national student unions, the common developed tool, which is universal across the European education area, is unfortunately still the ensuring tool that the certain issues are being discussed with the review panels and they're reflected upon the institutions with the students. So definitely that's the added value, and that's what we see from now. But none of this is just a retrospective point of view. We definitely also have the forward-looking discussions on how future of quality assurance might look like, and we are having these discussions ongoing. Definitely, either it is connected with the data-driven quality assurance potential, what it can be more rapid, more agile procedures. But basically, we are focusing on the on-hand outcomes of the quality assurance processes for the learners and for the learning processes. But I think there is a room for the discussion at some point, definitely, and in upcoming months, years, definitely that might be a topic that developments will go along with the whole higher education systems and the changing society. So that would be all from my side in this short intervention, and thanks for having me here.
Thank you very much, Jakub. And then I pass on the floor to Clara Inges-Perni.
Thank you very much. I would like to join my colleagues thanking for the excellent presentations and the inspiring discussion today. I would like to recall the wider European policy context in my comment, and also in a second part quickly react to the discussion in the first panel. Both in the Rome Communique of the European Higher Education Area and in the European Union context with the European Education Area, we see that there are trends for closer cooperation of universities and higher education institutions, also in the European Universities Alliances. And we see already that the implementation and the real achievements of these alliances rely a lot on or are connected a lot to quality assurance in the different countries, and that quality assurance is looking at the different institutions of which the European Universities Alliances are composed, and this creates some challenges, and it's important for these alliances that when stakeholders and the governments look at their quality, they don't only look at the quality of learning and teaching, but the quality of all their missions. And here, I think it will be an interesting discussion in the next years, how quality assurance will be able to serve this need. Another important factor I would like to mention is the development around micro-credentials. And here we see the need for looking at lifelong learning dimensions of institutions and lifelong learning in reality, in cooperation with vocational education institutions, with private providers, with other stakeholders, other companies, NGOs, etc. And here, quality assurance is also a crucial issue, and there are quite some question marks and areas where further development would be needed. And last but not least, from this policy context, I would also like to mention automatic recognition, which was mentioned by Colin earlier. That recognition is representing very clearly the trust which is needed between institutions when they cooperate in international context, and here this trust relates then very closely to the second part of my message, which I would like to give, is in the relation of the reviews, the strictness of the reviews and the external evaluations. From the trust perspective, it is really important that there is a strong gatekeeper for the ESG in the European higher education area, and in that sense, this role of EQAR should not be diminished. And when there is a call for flexibility, then it's also important to say that what we exactly mean under flexibility, because there shouldn't be any compromise on the real quality, because then trust is not there, and all the different actions cannot be taken forward. And ENQA has a very, very important role of supporting policymaking and supporting their members to discuss all these different trends, including the trends we heard from Björn, earlier in the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clara. And we will try to get some questions up before you can get last comments, because the time is running here. There is something going on in the chat that seems to create some not only discussion, but several people have put it up. And that was a sentence that Björn was giving in his presentation, a great sentence, quality assurance as an instrument of political opportunism. Will you like to give a comment on that? Another question here in the chat asks, how much is agency drift and how much is about ministries of higher education trying to control higher education institutions through the agencies? I see that Tia is up with her hand. Go ahead.
Yes, actually, during Björn's presentation, that was a sentence that I also wrote down because I thought it was excellent. I fully agree with the person who wrote it in the chat, and I had the same thought that part of Björn's presentation made it sound like it's the agencies also who are driving and wanting to do new things. Whereas from our side, we can see that it is quite often from the other actors in the higher education systems that decide to give the agencies new roles. Is it good or is it bad? It can be good. The challenge, of course, for our European structure, the ESG at the moment, is that the ESG focuses just on one part of the many agencies' activities. That is true. Should it cover all the agencies' activities? I wonder if that would be feasible, because what we are seeing, and also Björn clearly showed, that the agencies are developing into different directions, depending on the needs of their higher education or depending on the needs of the policymakers in each system. I would argue that perhaps the ESG needs to stay focused, but we need to recognize even better the fact that agencies are doing something else as well. They are not focusing on the ESGs. What does that then mean for the agency reviews would be a question that we need to ask ourselves in the future. But I just want to say that when, for instance, Clara was talking about the quality assurance of that would cover all missions, that reminded me of a quite old EUA policy statement from 10 years ago, where we exactly argue that quality assurance should cover all the institutional missions, whether it's internal or external quality assurance. So that has been also our view. And it does look like we're going to that direction.
Very good. Thank you, Tia. I don't see any other hands. I would like to also take departure from one of the things that you, Tia, said about the fatigue of quality assurance activities, let's call it that. Before you get the chance to say what's really important for you from your point of view in quality assurance in the future, do you think that we also should be more open to really discussing, is quality assurance and quality assurance activities done the best way as it was in 2005? That's when we had the tasks or the activities up first time. hasn't something changed in the society on how we do quality assurance? And should that also be reflected in how we think about quality assurance in the future? Does any one of you want to give a comment on that? Yeah.
I don't want to dominate, but I think it's an absolutely valid question. As Armando said, we are standing behind the fact that the ESG is at the moment it is valid, and it does allow the interpretation, and it does allow the flexibility. And it has been said many times that we should really focus on the standards and not so much on the guidelines. That being said, the universities are changing, the higher education is changing, the society is changing. For instance, the data that we have about the institutional performance has multiplied in many systems. So we should also consider if we need to use the opportunities that the modern technology gives us and the amount of data we have. So absolutely there needs to be a discussion about the different procedures. Can we get the information, at least some of it, also through other means than just the peer review? So I think this is something that we will be discussing in the next years. So I'm kind of moving on to the future part already.
Then I'll let Armando had a hand up, and then Clara, and then we move on to the last conclusions. Armando.
Okay, I just want to support what Tia said, and related with the first question also, because of course the autonomy of the universities are a major issue and should be respected, no doubt on that. But this will not be, in my opinion, a conflict with also the goal for quality that we have. And we can add this also to the necessary flexibility and diversity that our society demands from us. So I do believe that it is possible. I do not see it linked with the first question and the comments. I do not see it as an instrument, this kind of external evaluation as an instrument to control. I think it's a necessary instrument to give credibility and trust to the public, to the citizens, to trust more in our institutions, in the higher education institutions, and so the external evaluation is absolutely crucial on this aspect. And of course, the agencies play an absolutely vital role on this. And of course, we need to, and we have rules, we have legislations. We need to respect also those issues. So I think we can harmonize all these and have a better higher education system. I have no doubt on that.
Thank you very much. And then I give back the floor to Clara, and you give a short comment, and then you just move on to say what will, in your view, be the main direction of external quality assurance in the future in some short sentences.
Thank you. I think I will try to combine the two so that I can finish quicker. I think it is really important to highlight what you said, Øystein, at the beginning, that quality assurance is also developing, and I think this is really a healthy healthy process. And we heard that there will be more targeted reviews done by ENQA and EQAR. There is a trend towards more institutional external quality assurance. We heard about developments like in Finland or in Ireland, where quality assurance agencies look at the entire education and training spectrum and have a focus on qualifications as such, including players from outside, providers from outside formal education and training systems. And we mentioned the different missions of quality assurance. I think these are very, very interesting developments, and debates and discussions could be formed in the next years to see whether the instruments we have at our proposal now, if they serve all these purposes, if they can support higher education institutions, but also national authorities to see that institutions are working in a trustworthy way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clara. And Jakob, what do you think from a student perspective will be the main or the main direction for quality assurance in the years to come? You can also take the short term, only 2 years maybe. Go ahead.
It's very hard to say in a just one direction. I think from the discussion that we are just having, and we will be definitely developing this discussion, that the data-driven quality assurance and coming from the data points that are gathered through, for example, digital means, and going from those to evidence-based management and implementation of the changes could be a potential way forward. That's from the technical point of view. Building the possible instant feedback mechanism also is something that on a very core of the learning and teaching processes might be visible. That kind of developments might be visible on the local level, on the institutional level, but also that might be a cause for external quality assurance to look upon. But from the student engagement perspective in quality assurance procedures, I think recognition and supporting student engagement in quality assurance through, for example, flexible study conditions and recognition of this engagement, but also through building up the wide awareness among student communities, academic communities, of the added value of kind of maintaining improvement culture within universities would be the way forward. Because for now, we still see that the engagement of students in a constant improving the learning experience is quite limited to the quite narrow, I would say, number of students. So maybe broadening up this understanding why this whole system is in the place and contributing to the bettering the education might be the way forward. Interesting from the student perspective, definitely on the various levels.
Thank you. And then we go to Armando. Do you have short comments in the end for the main direction of quality assurance from your perspective? You said something, but maybe you want to give few more words.
Yes, thank you, Achim. I did say what I think are the most important, but of course I can. From our perspective, of course, all the actors should be involved in this important process of assuring quality. And when I talk about all the actors, I mean, of course, not only the ones that we have in our institutions, but also the communities, also the society. We need to involve all the actors and, of course, all the stakeholders that we have in the process. And we also need to have, and I believe we have it, and this webinar is demonstrated, we need to have room to discuss and to share. And we need to have also open mind to learn from the others and to work together, to cooperate. And I believe this is really important in the near future, that is in front of us. Of course, link it with all the main issues that we have on the table now. And they were mentioned particularly by Clara, the micro-credentials, the European universities, the digitalization, the important link, and I stressed it again, the important link between research and education. And we need to work on this to see how this can be as an added value that it is also for the learning process, also for the students. We need to think how to integrate this also in our evaluation process. Of course, giving the space it is, I have no question about it, of the importance of the external evaluation. Not only because of the thing that I said, the question of the trust, but also to try to improve the quality from an inside perspective. It is important not only to have the self-evaluation, but of course to have an external vision on what we are doing, and of course also a decision in this case. But this is really crucial to improve quality in our system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Armando. And then Tia, you started, now you end it. I give you the floor, and I will probably say a few words afterwards, but here you are.
Okay, I'll keep it very short. I think I've given some indication as to where I think we need to work on in quality assurance in the next stages. But I would pick up on something that Armando and Clara said about the trust. One important function of quality assurance is, and I believe it will continue to be, creating trust to our higher education and universities. And in that sense, while I would be very eager myself as well, and I recognized it when Clara said it, I've been saying that we need flexible quality assurance arrangements and criteria that allows the diversification of our higher education systems. I see that we do need to strike the right balance. So let's try to innovate, but at the same time ensure that the trust function of the quality assurance will remain there, because that will be important, for instance, in fighting against the political opportunism that was mentioned earlier.
Thank you very much, Tia. I think we need to move towards an end of this webinar. It has been very good to hear different points of view. We have been into the questions about the review processes towards the quality assurance agencies itself, but we have also made it possible for us to really talk about the developments that takes place in the sector of universities, university colleges, vocational institutions. That brings up the need to really discuss, why do we do quality assurance? With what goal do we do quality assurance? How do we do quality assurance? And are the processes that we have today really fit for purpose to really maintain what we need, namely to give trust into the activities of doing higher education and vocational education? So I will not try to summarize in a way that it will only be my words, but I really hope that all of you had a very good chance of catching up with questions that are really to be asked and also to be discussed, that we continue to discuss this and also open the possibilities of developing quality assurance, also the phenomenon of quality assurance in Europe, and that we also continue to have these kind of webinars or seminars, really to put up the discussion, and the discussion will continue on national level and also on European level and on international level, also outside Europe. I think that's also important for us. So to all of you, to the four of you, thank you very much. To all of you who have participated in this webinar, we give great thanks to AQU Catalunya, to A3ES, to QQI, and to NOKUT, who I represent myself. Thank you for going together and bringing up this discussion. I hope that we can do something that is similar to this in not too far future. So to all of you, thank you very much and have a really good afternoon onwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.